Shalom, my friends. I want to share another story with you that I have been longing to share with you, but for a long time I have resisted sharing it because I didn't want any of you to think that I am desiring to esteem myself or to in any way take the esteem that belongs to only our Father Yahweh and what He deserves. But through confirmed through our February 15, 2020 live stream fellowship that it is the will of the Father for me to share this story with the Mishpachah because of what can be learned from this true story. So please just consider me His humble servant, and what I now share as a testimony to Him and His power and His guidance in our lives. So without further ado, here's the story. I was headed to a city just to the north of where I live, less than a 2-hour drive away, where I was planning to attend an important meeting. And I have never, ever been one to pick up hitchhikers. As you all well know, that it's a dangerous thing to pick up someone from the side of the road. They could be thieves, murderers, con artists, or any other malevolent being that you just certainly would not want in your car. But in spite of knowing all of that, I saw a hitchhiker as soon as I ramped onto the interstate, and the Ruach urged me to stop and pick him up. I went past him, just a little bit embarrassing, as I was nervous to pick him up. But I finally came to a stop, and the young man with a duffel bag came running to my door and entered my car. Thoughts went through my head immediately. Does he have a gun in that duffel bag? Does he have a knife in there? But those thoughts were immediately curbed when he spoke to me and thanked me sincerely for picking him up. And I felt a good spirit about the young man, whom I soon learned was only a teenager, 16 years old. He came from Florida, from the house of his mother, who was a drug user and a riotous woman. She had kicked him out of her house, and the only thing he could do or think of was try and find his father, who lived in Missouri somewhere. He called the name of the place, but I can't remember it. I said, well, I'm not going to Missouri, but I'm going to such and such a city, and I can give you a ride until there. And he said, that's where I'm going, to the bus station in that city, to catch a bus to Missouri. So I said, okay, I can drop you off at the bus station on my way to an important meeting that I want to attend. And he was tickled. He was well pleased. We continued to talk just a little only, and I felt that maybe since he had been hitchhiking for a long time already, that he was hungry. So I said, I'm hungry. Let's stop and get something to eat. And he nervously agreed, and I figured that perhaps he just didn't have much money. So I exited the interstate, and I drove to a McDonald's and told him, order what you want and I'll pay for it. And so we had a meal together. Still not too much small talk. He was not a talkative person, but rather quiet instead. We continued to the bus station, and when we arrived, I was a little surprised that there was an empty parking lot in front of the bus station, and the only vehicle I saw besides my own was one bus in front of the terminal. And he said, "You can just let me out here." Well, I was still a good 50 yards or so away from the bus terminal, but I did as he wished, and I parked the car, turned off the engine, and I asked him if he had money for the ticket. And he said, "I have a little." And the Ruach led me to give him what I had, which was only about $200. And I told him, I said, "This should cover your ticket and give you a little money for food until you reach Missouri. I wish I could give you more, but that's all that I have. I hope and pray that you find your father." He was very grateful and thanked me and exited my car. I started the engine immediately and looked back to see if he was clear of the vehicle before I started backing up, and he was gone. Gone. I'm in the middle of a large parking lot, like similar to the size of what you would find at a Walmart, and he was nowhere in sight. He could not have made it to the station in 1 second. The world's fastest man at full speed would take more than 5 seconds to get to the bus terminal from where we were. And immediately the Ruach HaKodesh brought to my mind the scripture in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 2. It says, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." I was completely overwhelmed. Chills came over my whole being. I had obviously entertained a messenger, an angel. The question now was, why did the Father allow me to experience this visitation? The answer is to bring up this question in each and every heart of those seeking the truth. Those of you watching or listening to this study right now. This is the question. How can I hear the Ruach HaKodesh? Allow me to answer this question with 3 scriptural witnesses. And we'll start with one in 1 Kings chapter 19. To give you a little bit of background, Eliyahu was fleeing from Isabel, that's Jezebel, because she sent a messenger to him and promising to kill him the next day. Well, the messenger of Yahweh also visited Eliyahu and gave him the strength to travel 40 days and nights without food until he reached Mount Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. Yahweh spoke to Eliyahu in verse 11. This is our first witness. "And he said, Go out and stand on the mountain before Yahweh. And see, Yahweh passed by, and a great and strong wind tearing the mountains and breaking the rocks in pieces before Yahweh. Yahweh was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. Yahweh was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. And Yahweh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And it came to be, when Eliyahu heard it, that he wrapped his face in his robe and went out and stood at the cave opening. And see, a voice came to him. Why did he not go to the entrance of the cave during the strong wind? Why not during the earthquake? Why not during the fire? Because he knew the voice of the Father, the still small voice. How did he know it? He had a lot of practice. He pitched his tent with Yahweh every day. He grew accustomed to the moving of the Ruach HaKodesh. And he could hear with his physical ears and his spiritual ears. Okay, here's the second witness. This is out of the book of Yochanan, that's John, chapter 10, verse 27. Yeshua is speaking, and he says, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." You can approach a flock of sheep and start calling them, and maybe one or two might look up at you out of curiosity. But if their shepherd starts calling them, the entire flock comes running. They recognize his voice. They know him. They trust him. They hear him every day, and that is how they know his voice. They hear it every day. Let's go to our third witness. Okay, this is the parable of the sower, but I'm going to only read the last couple of verses for time's sake. This is found in Marcos chapter 4, verse 8. That's Mark chapter 4, verse 8 and verse 9. And I'll insert the word seed, other seed fell on good soil, and that came up and grew and yielded a crop, some 30-fold, some 60, some 100-fold. And he said, Yeshua, he said to them, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Yeshua spoke these same words, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear," 14 times in the Renewed Covenant books. Sometimes hearing can be directly related to understanding, and we hear what the Word is saying because we understand the meaning of the words in our hearts and minds. That is a revelation, a meltah, if you will. You can't have spiritual revelation without the Ruach HaKodesh. It just won't happen. Now, we have established by virtue of 3 scriptural witnesses that Elohim does speak to mankind. And we could list many more scriptures that confirm this also, but these 3 are sufficient for this study. So, to answer the question behind this entire story, how can I hear the Ruach HaKodesh? You excited? You must do the things that I will share with you right now. First, every day, pitch your tent with Elohim and let him, ask him to pitch his tent with you. Number 2, make the Father number 1 on a list of 1 in your life. 3, pray without ceasing. And then finally 4, do your utmost. Study to present yourself approved to Elohim, a workman who does not need to be ashamed, rightly handling or dividing the word of truth. If you do these 4 things, brothers and sisters, and you do those daily, you will grow closer to the Father, and he will give you ears to hear, and you will hear the Ruach HaKodesh. How you will hear depends on how the Father desires to speak to you, and that's at different times, of course. I have heard the Ruach in different ways. I've heard a voice as if someone were just speaking to me. I've felt a strong urge in my Ruach, like when I was led to pick up the hitchhiker. I've had scripture just pop into my head, into my mind, like when the hitchhiker disappeared. I've been given a dream from the Father, and upon waking I would know that the dream was from the Father, and usually the dream would be something to teach me that the Father wanted me to learn. I've been given a vision. If you watched my video how I met Messiah. Um, that was a vision that I had of His light and His love, and I was surrounded by His light in the clouds, and that was a spectacular thing in my life for me, and it's still a spectacular thing today. And I cry. I don't want to get talking about it because I cry again. I cry every time I think about it. And anyway, the Ruach mostly speaks to me with a strong urge in my Ruach, and many times with a sudden prompting of Scripture. And these last two ways are the best and the most common in my experience. I would, however, like to tell you that if you don't study the Scriptures, the Ruach cannot use the Scriptures to bring back into your mind, because you're recalling those. And you're recalling them by help of the Ruach, but you have to know them already. Otherwise, the Ruach can't use those to speak to you. And I would also like to advise you to avoid sensationalism, as it leads to error, hence missing the mark. Well, Kavarim, friends, I hope this study was a help to each and every one of you. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, Shalom.